Now, let's have a listen to Oprah Winfrey. This is a clip from what you can expect to hear. Sunday night it goes out in America, Monday night on ITV here. They paid £1 million for this guff.
How do you feel about the palace hearing you speak your truth today?
I don't know how they could expect that after all of this time, we would still just be silent if there is an active role that the firm is playing in perpetuating falsehoods about us. And if that comes with risk of losing things, I mean, there's a lot that's been lost already.
Is it finished? A lot that's been lost already. Yeah, I'll tell you what's been lost. Your dignity, Harry's dignity. You've lost the audience as well, by the way. You've certainly lost me. And you could get lost as well, quite frankly. Let's talk to Helen Dale. Helen, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Well, listen, I've had enough of these two. People have been accusing me, of course, of racism because I want to strip them of their British citizenship, pointing out small facts that, for example, Meghan doesn't have British citizenship. It doesn't matter. Point is, I don't want her to have it. I don't think she should be allowed to have it, and I don't think he should have it anymore either. What do you reckon? I mean, there's a constitutional issue here, obviously.
I actually think that part of the problem with Meghan especially is that people in Britain, and this is something I saw in Australia, this happens as well, this phenomenon happens as well, are reacting negatively to her, not on the basis of race or sex, but her nationality.
Yes.
In my experience, that a lot of Americans, and it doesn't matter what their social class is, whether they're posh like Meghan or whether they're more working class, really, sorry, I've got an eyelash in my eye there. They really struggle in foreign countries. And it's, I mean, we all make these awful jokes about, the only reason Americans can find countries on a map is when their government is bombing it and bombing them and that
Yes.
kind of thing. But there, I mean, behind those jokes, there is a reality, and the reality is that Americans, when you go to the United States, because of the nature of the country, you can perform a very inexpensive piece of magic. You go there and you can watch your country of origin disappear.
Yes.
And one of the few exceptions to this in the US, and I've noticed this every time I go there, is the royals. You see the magazine racks in newsagents in America or in shops, and there is often more stuff on the front pages about the royal family, and this goes back before Harry and Meghan, they're just the latest addition to it, than you even see in British magazines. It reminds me of my girlhood in Australia, where basically Australia had for many years, it's kind of faded now, partly because of the internet and partly because Australian Consolidated Press, which was the big magazine publishing company, was bought out by Bauer Media and they ran it into the ground.
Right.
But my girlhood in Australia is just seeing every single women's magazine and a substantial number of men's magazines as well, just plastered with stuff about the royal family in ways that I found quite staggering.
No surprise to you that I used to write for some of those magazines when I worked in New York, and that was all they were interested in, was stuff about the royal family.
That's all they care about.
And interestingly enough, also, when I first went to work in America, I was also amazed at their fascination with the Monaco royal family as well, because I didn't really care about the Monaco royal family, Princess Stephanie and Grace Kelly and all that crowd, and Prince Rainier and all that. But in America, it was on the front pages of these tabloid magazines all the time.
And I've always thought the thing that always sticks with me, less so the most recent one, obviously, because it was under very unusual circumstances, but whenever the US president is inaugurated, when there's the 4-yearly inauguration, it looks to me, as someone who grew up in a Commonwealth country where there's a considerable historic affection, particularly for the Queen and to a lesser extent Prince Philip.
Yeah.
It looks like a coronation. And I mean, I remember my father, when I was a little girl, joking, the Americans are crowning their president again, because that's how it came across to people in the Commonwealth, was this coronation.
Yeah.
And maybe the obsession that you encountered as a journalist, where you were being expected constantly to write not just about your own royals, but other countries' royals, like Monaco, is that thing of, well, we don't have a president, we don't have a king, so we'll do the next best thing, and we'll make a big fancy out of it. as well.
And they do try, don't they, to have that kind of image of the president and the office of the president. And it kind of came under a bit of pressure because of Donald Trump, because people were struggling to respect Donald Trump while still trying to pretend they were respecting the office of the president. But they say, don't they, Americans, that that's the one kind of thing that they have which they look up to. Not the person in the office, but the actual office.
It's the office,
yeah.
Which is why they retain their titles. And I mean, I remember absolutely poo-footing myself at some function in America because I forgot to use a historic title for President Clinton.
Right.
You know, I was making a speech or something like that, and I just did the British and Australian thing because you're an ex-Prime Minister. David Cameron is an ex-Prime Minister. Theresa May is an ex-Prime Minister. Tony Blair is an ex-Prime Minister. And no matter how much they're loved or hated or disrespected or respected, I mean, no British newspaper would get up and refer to Tony Blair as the Prime Minister.
No.
I mean, you would have people reading it and falling about the place laughing.
Right, exactly right. No, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? But let's talk a little bit about the Commonwealth relationship with the Queen and the royal family in particular, because they often travel down there. I mean, in fact, I presume Meghan Markle's trip to Fiji when she was wearing the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's earrings as a gift was part of her trip to that part of the world, presumably included Australasia as well. There is an awful lot of royal trips made down there, and there is occasionally a vote taken, isn't there, or a poll taken about whether or not Australia should do away with their ties to the royal family.
Well, I mean, there is a significant Republican movement in Australia, and it is a minority of the population, although it hasn't been tested at a vote, an actual vote, since 1989.
Right.
There was the Republican referendum in Australia, where there was a constitutional convention proposing the model that was going to be voted on, and then there was a referendum. And now the reason there has to be a referendum is because, like the United States, Australia has a written entrenched constitution. Right. Unlike the United States, where you have to get 2/3 of the states in the state houses in America, in Australia it's by popular vote, and it's modelled on the way the Swiss use referendums. So in order to pass a referendum to change the Australian constitution, you don't just need a simple majority of the Australian population, you also need a majority of the states. You know, that's section 128 of the Australian Constitution. And that was introduced when the Constitution was drafted in the late 19th century, and then it was enacted. It was actually an act of the Victorian Parliament in 1901. Victorian as in when Queen Victoria was here, not Victoria the state in Australia. I need to make that clear. Right. And when this was put to a vote, this was another one of those examples where the polls seemed to be indicating that Australians would opt for a republic. And the final result was actually 55 to 45 in favour of the monarchy.
Right.
So
and that was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it?
It was another example of a cursed ratio, but instead of 52-48, it was 55-45,
well, wasn't that
which
the
was
same
what
as
Scotland.
I was going to say that's the
Scotland,
same as the independence referendum, right?
In 2014, and it was carried in no state. One of the territories, the Australian Capital Territory, which is where Canberra, the capital, is located, that's a territory, it's not a state. Right. It passed, it got more than 50% there, but in no other part of Australia did it pass. And it's generally recognised now that one of the reasons for that is because the Queen is held in very high esteem in Australia and always has been. Every time there's been a royal tour involving the Queen, you can go on YouTube and find footage from the 1950s of the Queen in Australia, and you just have throngs of people, little Australian school children waving Aussie flags and waving the Union Jack or waving the flags of the home nations by the side of the road and giving her flowers and
well, you know, I used to do all that when I was at school in London, primary school, going back quite a long way, as you can imagine. The Queen, we were quite close to Lord's cricket ground, and the Queen would drive past our school whenever she was going to Lord's to watch the cricket, and we would all be dutifully put out on the pavement with our little school uniforms on, waving Union Jacks, which we were provided with by the school. And it was an annual occurrence every time, you know, that Lord's was open for business. And, you know, you can't imagine them doing that now.
Well, yes, it's the the world has changed. Although were she younger and fitter, and the Queen, but holding all other things constant, ceteris paribus, and the Queen came to Australia again, you would get that enormous popularity. It may be expressed somewhat differently, but maybe with less of the flag waving, although I don't know. Australians are at a midpoint in between Americans, who are very flag waving, and Brits who very often, when they hang the Union Jack, they hang it upside down and the stripes in the wrong place as a result.
Yes.
So whereas obviously you can't do that with the Aussie one, because the Union, or the Kiwi one, because the Union Jack is in the corner.
Has there ever been a move to get that moved out of the way?
Yes, there has. And interestingly, that is even less popular, changing the flag, than changing the system of government by a referendum to a republic. There is really, I mean, there have been various flag designing competitions like they did in Canada, but part of the problem, I think, is because the Australian sporting colours are green and gold, and so are South Africa's, and so are Brazil's, whereas Canada have that lovely red and white, and their flag design, the maple leaf, is extremely beautiful.
Yes.
You know, I've often thought it's unusual for something to be selected in a popular vote like that to just be such a roaring success. I mean, that maple leaf is instantly recognisable and very beautiful, very striking design.
No, absolutely right. You're spot on with that. But in terms of what happens, because obviously, you know, there's a lot of talk before, even aside from this sort of sideshow of the Harry and Meghan interview with Oprah Winfrey. Prince Philip's not very well. He's 99 years of age. He's not likely to be alive in 10 years' time, certainly. And there are those who think that if he does die, and when he does die, the Queen may not last that much longer beyond that. And then it's suddenly a different conversation, isn't it? Because Prince Charles becoming king, or Prince William becoming king, makes a big difference, I think, to the royal family around the world.
Yes, it does. And I don't like doing forecasts, as you know, but with Charles on the throne, particularly, if another referendum were held in Australia about being a republic or a monarchy, it is... I would not want to predict with any confidence that the monarchical, or the Australians for a constitutional monarchy, they're called, I would not want to predict with any confidence that that would remain in place, because Charles is a divisive figure. Lots of people agree with his views on architecture, for example, and the jokes about carbuncles. I remember when that first came out, I thought, yeah, I agree with you there. There's a lot of awful, ugly buildings that need to be, you know, fired out of the solar system in Britain, when, you know, more urban, it looks like urban renewal by the Luftwaffe, but it's not really. It's urban renewal done by bad town planners.
And also the Green Brigade have sort of caught up with some of his, what used to be thought of as more kind of eccentric views about the world and the environment.
But by the same token, he's also into homeopathy and stuff like that, which is pseudoscience, you know. So, and then there was the attempt, the spider letters, I think they were called, the attempt to write, you know, to have some degree of influence on, as a non-elected figure, on the government. I mean, and you're supposed to have it's meant to be a ceremonial head of state. I mean, this is what we've had civil wars over in this country. So, I honestly don't know what would happen in Australia. I think the flag would stay.
Yeah.
I've seen no sign that people want to change the flag with the Union Jack in the corner. Likewise, in New Zealand, I've seen no sign that people want to change the flag with the Union Jack in the corner. But by the same token, the New Zealanders have got, like the Canadians, a native plant that is very beautiful. I don't know if you've ever watched the New Zealand netball team play, but they're called the Silver Ferns, and they have black
bizarrely,
field.
I have. The reason I have is because Graham Henry used to be the guy that ran the Wales rugby team shortly before he ran the All Blacks, and his wife, Raywin, was in charge of the netball team.
Yeah, and I suspect if the New Zealanders were to vote on a flag, it would finish up being the flag of the netball team. It would be the Silver Fern, you know, with the black field in the background, and the beautiful silver fern symbol, which is lovely. You see the netballers, and it's so distinctive. It's like the maple leaf.
Yes.
Australia has the wattle, but it's yellow again.
Yes.
You know, and if you make your flag look green and gold, you know, you've got Brazil, you've got South Africa, you've got all these other countries with those green and gold colours, because they're very striking.
Yes.
And they look good for sport, but I'm not sure they look good on a flag.
No, exactly. And also, the interesting thing now about the Commonwealth is that it is now an actual kind of economic entity post-Brexit, because there's a lot of people making noises about doing trade with the Commonwealth as a group, doing possibly a lot more trade with the Commonwealth than we've ever done as a result of not now doing so much trade with the EU.
Well, yes, it is genuinely quite possible. And I mean, I believe figures like Professor Vernon Bogdanor have averted to this, that it's entirely possible that trade between Australia in particular and the United Kingdom post a free trade agreement could return to the levels in terms of percentages. Obviously, the populations of both countries are much bigger, but in terms of percentages rather than volume, trade between Australia and the UK could return to what it was before 1973, and which was before the UK joined at what was then the European Economic Community.
Yes. That
may well happen. It's entirely possible. Rather than the common agricultural policy, which, as people have pointed out, never really suited the UK, and de Gaulle knew this. This was one of the reasons why he kept saying no. You know, it was because he knew it didn't suit the UK. What used to happen historically was basically the UK imported nearly all its food from Australia and Canada, which have absolute, not just comparative advantage in agriculture, and paid its own farmers deficiency payments. And my partner jokes, you know, says, oh, well, you know, the farmers were being paid to manicure the countryside and make it look pretty with these deficiency payments.
Yes. Well, we had the same, didn't we? I mean, that was what was going on here. But we've reached the end once again, Helen, of a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much for your insight. Helen Dale there, writer, lawyer, political commentator on the relationship between the Commonwealth and Australia in particular with the royal family, with the Queen. I don't think they'll miss Has and Megs. I don't think they'll care whether they ever see them again, and neither will I, by the way. But interesting times, I can tell you, because we've got two polls currently going on. One on Twitter, on my Twitter account, which is, of course, at IROMG. 76% of you on that account say that, yes, Harry and Meghan should be stripped of their British citizenship. But on the talkRADIO one, which is slightly different because it's been put out by talkRADIO, it's actually going the other way. No, 69%. Yes, 31%. How bizarre is that?